The research base on Kepler 442c looked like something from a dream. Silver walls curved smoothly around rooms filled with strange machines that hummed and glowed. Floating screens showed data in languages that twisted and danced across their surfaces. The air itself seemed to sparkle with energy from the advanced technology that kept everything running. Jake Martinez stood in the main hall and whistled softly. Back home in Texas, the most advanced thing in his dorm room was a coffee maker that sometimes worked. Here, even the floors seemed to know when someone was walking on them. They lit up with soft blue light under his worn sneakers. The Galactic Education Initiative had picked one human student to join their program. Out of millions who applied, they chose Jake. He still could not believe it. His acceptance letter had arrived 3 months ago, written in perfect English, but sealed with something that looked like liquid starlight. Now he was here, surrounded by beings he had only seen in movies. The Vorthak students looked like walking crystals. Their bodies caught light and threw it back in patterns that somehow meant words. When they talked, rainbow colors danced across their surface. Jake had learned that happy Vorthak glowed bright yellow, while confused ones flickered between purple and green. The Zhril were completely different. They looked like giant ants that had learned to walk upright and wear clothes. Their big black eyes never seemed to blink, and they had 4 arms that moved independently. When they worked together, it was like watching one mind control multiple bodies. They shared thoughts, somehow finishing each other's sentences in their clicking language. The strangest students were the Etherians. They had no solid bodies at all. Instead, they lived inside special suits that kept their gas-like forms contained. The suits were transparent, and Jake could see them swirling inside like colorful smoke. Their voices came through speakers built into their helmets, always sounding far away and echo-like. Jake felt very ordinary next to all of them. While his classmates had arrived with floating luggage and devices that translated thoughts into words, he had brought 2 old suitcases and a backpack. His most advanced possession was a tablet computer that was already 3 years old. The other students had been polite, but distant. They seemed puzzled by him, like they could not figure out why humans were considered worthy of joining their program. Jake did not blame them. Compared to their technology, Earth probably looked like it was still in the Stone Age. Professor Kelvin was a Vorthak who taught energy systems. The crystal beings stood at the front of the classroom, light patterns flowing across their surface. As they spoke, a translation device turned the light show into words Jake could understand. Today we discuss survival in isolated environments, Professor Kelvin said. The colors on their bodies shifted to serious blue and white. When advanced beings establish outposts far from home, they must plan for every possible failure. This is why we build multiple backup systems. A holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed a space station with dozens of power sources. Fusion reactors, solar collectors, quantum batteries, and energy storage systems all connected in a complex web. The key is redundancy through technology, the professor continued. If one system fails, 10 others take its place. If those fail, 10 more activate. This is how civilized species ensure survival. Zara 9947, one of the Zhril students, raised 2 of her 4 arms. Professor, our homeworld has achieved a 99.97% reliability rate in critical systems. We have eliminated the possibility of catastrophic failure through superior engineering. The other alien students made sounds of agreement. Crystals chimed, gas swirled faster in suits, and mandibles clicked approvingly. Jake shifted in his seat. The chair had automatically adjusted to his body when he sat down, but it still felt strange. Everything here was designed to anticipate needs and solve problems before they happened. It was impressive, but something about it bothered him. He raised his hand. What happens when all the advanced systems fail at once? The classroom went quiet. Professor Kelvin's light patterns stuttered to a confused yellow-green. Explain your question. Well, Jake said, aware that everyone was staring at him, what if something happens that your engineers never planned for? Something that knocks out all your backup systems at the same time? Hex 7, a Vortex student, flashed bright red. In their species, red meant either anger or disbelief. Such scenarios are statistically impossible. Our technology accounts for all variables, but what if it does not? Jake pressed. Back home, we have a saying, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen is something nobody saw coming. The Etherean student Mist of World spoke through their helmet speaker. Your species still relies on primitive backup methods because your primary technology is unreliable. When technology advances sufficiently, such concerns become irrelevant. Jake felt his cheeks warm. They were not trying to be rude, but their words stung. Maybe sometimes simple solutions work when complex ones do not. Professor Kelvin's patterns shifted to diplomatic purple. Human perspectives are ... interesting. Your species has survived many challenges with limited resources. However, the goal of advancement is to move beyond such limitations. After class, Jake walked back to his room feeling frustrated. The other students had not been mean, exactly, but they clearly thought humans were primitive. They saw his people as a species that had not yet learned to build proper technology. His room was small but comfortable. The walls could change color and temperature based on his mood, and the bed adjusted itself every time he moved. On his desk sat the one thing he had brought that made the alien students curious. It was an old exercise bike his grandfather had given him. The bike was nothing special. It had been made on Earth 20 years ago, with simple gears and a basic electronic display. Jake had brought it because the artificial gravity on the base was lighter than Earth normal. He wanted to stay in shape, but the bike had drawn questions from his classmates. They could not understand why he would bring such a crude device, when the base had advanced fitness equipment that could simulate any type of exercise perfectly. Jake ran his hand over the bike's worn handlebars. His grandfather had bought it, used and fixed it up himself. The old man had taught Jake that understanding how things worked was more important than having the fanciest tools. Sometimes, boy, his grandfather used to say, the best solution is the one that still works when everything else breaks down. Jake had not understood what that meant when he was younger. Now, surrounded by technology that seemed to think for itself, he was starting to get it. All these amazing systems depended on other amazing systems. If something went wrong with the foundation, everything built on top of it would fall. He sat on the exercise bike and pedaled slowly, thinking the bike was simple. Pedals turned gears. Gears turned a wheel. The wheel spun a small generator that powered the display. No computer chips, no quantum anything, no advanced materials. Just metal and magnets and motion outside his window. The alien sun was setting behind the curve of the planet they orbited. The base's lights came on automatically, powered by the fusion reactor in the lower levels. Everything here worked perfectly. Efficiently, automatically. Jake pedaled a little faster. Somehow, he had the feeling that perfection was not going to last forever. And when it failed, he suspected that his old exercise bike might be worth more than all the advanced technology in the galaxy. The warning came at 3 a.m, base time. Jake woke to the sound of alarms echoing through the metal corridors. Red lights flashed on and off, casting strange shadows on his walls. He rolled out of bed and pulled on his clothes quickly. The base's computer voice spoke in calm, measured tones. Solar storm detected. All students report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Jake had learned about solar storms in his Earth classes. The sun sometimes threw massive amounts of energy into space, like invisible lightning that could travel for millions of miles. On Earth, the planet's magnetic field protected people from most of the effects. But here on Kepler 442c there was no such protection. He hurried to the main hall where the other students were gathering. The alien beings looked worried in their own ways. The Vortex students flickered between colors rapidly, unable to settle on any one emotion. The Zrill clustered together, their mandibles clicking in fast, nervous patterns. The Ethereans swirled more quickly inside their suits. Like storms trapped in glass bottles. Professor Kelvin stood at the front of the room, their crystal body pulsing with urgent orange light. The storm will reach us in approximately 1 hour. All non-essential systems are being shut down to protect the equipment. Essential systems have been switched to emergency power. Jake looked around the room. Everything seemed normal. The lights still worked, the air still felt fresh and warm, and the floor panels still glowed softly under their feet. It was hard to believe that danger was racing toward them through space. "How bad will it be?" asked X7, one of the Vortex students. "Our shields will absorb most of the impact," Professor Kelvin replied. "The base is designed to withstand solar events 5 times stronger than this one. There is no cause for concern." The professor's confident words seemed to calm everyone. Students began to disperse back to their rooms. Some went to the observation deck to watch for the storm's arrival. Others gathered in study groups to discuss the electromagnetic effects they would witness. Jake felt restless. Something about the situation made him uncomfortable, though he could not explain why. Instead of going back to his room, he decided to explore parts of the base he had not seen before. The base was larger than it appeared from the outside. Corridors branched off in multiple directions, leading to laboratories, storage areas, and technical sections. Jake followed signs toward the power generation area. Curious about how the base actually worked, the reactor room was impressive. A massive cylindrical chamber hummed with energy behind thick protective walls. Control panels covered with blinking lights surrounded the reactor, monitoring every aspect of its operation. Jake could not read the alien symbols on the displays, but the steady pattern suggested everything was running smoothly. He found a human-readable status board near the entrance. It showed power output, fuel levels, and system status. Everything was green, indicating normal operation. The reactor was producing enough energy to power a small city. Fascinating, is it not? A voice said behind him. Jake turned to see Dr. Vel, one of the Etherean instructors. The gas being swirled slowly inside their containment suit, colors shifting from blue to purple. "It is," Jake agreed. "I have never seen anything like it." "This reactor represents the pinnacle of Jril engineering," Dr. Vel explained. "It can operate continuously for 50 years without maintenance. The control systems are entirely automated, with 17 layers of backup protection. What happens if the controls break?" Jake asked. Dr. Vel's gaseous form rippled with what might have been amusement. "They cannot break. The systems are designed with quantum-level redundancy. Even if the primary computers failed, the secondary systems would take over instantly." Jake nodded, but the uncomfortable feeling in his stomach grew stronger. He had grown up around machines, and his grandfather had taught him that every machine could break. The more complex a machine was, the more ways it could go wrong. They returned to the main hall just as the storm hit. The first sign was a flicker in the lights. Then the floor panels dimmed slightly. The holographic displays wavered like heat mirages. "Minor fluctuations," Professor Kelvin announced. "The shielding is performing as expected." But the fluctuations grew worse. The lights began to strobe. Irregularly, some of the wall panels went completely dark. The air circulation system made strange grinding noises. Then everything went black. The darkness was complete and absolute. Jake could not see his own hand in front of his face. The constant background hum of the base's systems fell silent. Even the subtle vibration he had grown used to feeling through the floor disappeared. Emergency lighting should have activated immediately. Backup power should have restored essential systems within seconds, but nothing happened. The base remained dark and quiet as a tomb. Someone screamed. Jake thought it might have been one of the Etherean students. In the darkness, it was impossible to tell who was who or where anyone was standing. "Remain calm," Professor Kelvin's voice called out, but their translation device was not working. Instead of words, Jake heard only strange chiming sounds that meant nothing to him. "The backup systems will activate momentarily," came Dr. Vel's voice from somewhere to Jake's left. But the doctor's translator was failing too. The words faded in and out, broken by static. Minutes passed. The temperature in the room began to drop noticeably. Without climate control, The base was losing heat rapidly to the cold vacuum outside. Jake pulled out his phone and activated its flashlight. The small LED beam cut through the darkness, revealing chaos. His alien classmates were moving around blindly, bumping into furniture and each other. Some were making distress sounds in their native languages. Others had gone completely silent. "Is anyone hurt?" Jake called out in English, knowing most of them could understand him even if their translators were not working. "Here," came Zara 9947's clicking voice. "Not injured, confused, our neural interfaces have stopped functioning." "Same here," said Hex 7. The Vortex student's crystal body was completely dark, no longer glowing with the light patterns they used to communicate. Jake swept his phone's beam around the room, taking stock of the situation. All the alien students looked lost and frightened. They had never experienced complete technological failure before. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that advanced systems would always work. "How long until the backup power comes on?" asked Mist of Worlds, one of the Etherean students. "It should have come on already," Jake said quietly. The truth was sinking in. This was not a minor malfunction or a temporary power interruption. Something had gone catastrophically wrong. The solar storm had not just overloaded their shields. It had completely destroyed the base's electronic systems. Jake thought about the reactor room he had visited earlier. All those blinking lights and automated controls were probably dead now. The 17 layers of backup protection Dr. Vell had mentioned were useless if they all depended on computer systems that no longer existed. His alien classmates began to panic as the reality of their situation became clear. They were stranded on a remote moon with no power, no heat, no communication systems, and no way to call for help. Their advanced technology had failed them completely, but Jake was not panicking. He was thinking about his grandfather's old workshop. Back on Earth, he was thinking about machines that worked without computer chips or quantum processors. He was thinking about his exercise bike, sitting in his room just down the hall. Simple machines, mechanical systems, things that worked even when everything else failed. For the first time since arriving at the base, Jake felt like he might actually be useful. Jake kept his phone's flashlight pointed at the floor as he moved through the dark corridors. The alien students had been talking in panicked voices for 20 minutes now, but no one had suggested doing anything practical. They seemed to be waiting for their technology to fix itself. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees. Jake could see his breath now, small puffs of vapor that disappeared quickly in the cold air. At this rate, they would all freeze to death long before rescue arrived. He made his way to the technical areas he had explored earlier. The reactor room was pitch black, its control panels dead and silent. But Jake was not interested in the complex computer systems. He wanted to see the reactor itself. Using his phone's light, he examined the massive cylindrical chamber. The metal was still warm to the touch, which meant the fusion reaction inside was probably still running. The problem was not with the power source. The problem was with all the electronic systems that controlled it. Jake had studied basic electrical engineering. Back on Earth, he knew that power generation was actually simple in concept. You needed something that moved, something that created a magnetic field and copper wire to carry the electricity. Everything else was just control systems and safety features. The base's main reactor was producing massive amounts of energy, but all of that power was trapped inside because the control computers could not manage the output. It was like having a running car with a broken transmission. The engine worked fine, but the power could not get to the wheels. He returned to the main hall where his classmates were still discussing their hopeless situation. Professor Kelvon was trying to maintain order, but without their translation devices, communication was breaking down. The different species were reverting to their native languages, making coordination nearly impossible. "Listen," Jake called out, his voice echoing in the dark space. "I think I know what happened." The talking stopped. Jake felt dozens of eyes focusing on him, though he could only see the ones closest to his flashlight beam. "The reactor is still running," he continued. "I checked. The fusion chamber is still producing power. But all the control systems are fried?" The computers that regulate the power output are dead. Then we are trapped, Hex 7's voice came from the darkness. Without their light-based communication, the Vorthak student sounded flat and emotionless. Without quantum processors, the reactor cannot be operated safely. That is correct, agreed Zara 9947. Manual operation of fusion systems is impossible. The reaction occurs too quickly for biological reflexes to control. Jake shook his head, even though no one could see the gesture. You are thinking about it wrong. We do not need to control the fusion reaction. We just need to tap into the power it is already making. Explain, came Dr. Vell's voice from near the wall. Jake thought about how to put it in terms they would understand. The reactor is like a waterfall. It has huge amounts of energy pouring out constantly. Right now, all that energy is going nowhere because the dam that was supposed to channel it is broken. We need to build a new channel. With what materials? Asked Mist of Worlds. We have no fabrication equipment. No design computers, no precision tools. We have wire, Jake said. Lots of it, and we have magnets. And we have things that can move. He paused, thinking about his next words carefully. We can build a generator. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Professor Kelvon spoke in their chiming language. Without translation, Jake could not understand the words, but the tone sounded skeptical. A manual generator? Zara 9947's voice carried disbelief. Primitive mechanical systems cannot produce the power levels required to restart electronic systems. How much power do we actually need? Jake asked. Not to run everything, just to get the emergency systems working. Heat, air circulation, basic lights. There was whispering in various alien languages. Jake waited, playing his flashlight beam around the room to conserve the battery. Approximately 12 kilowatts, Dr. Vell finally answered. That would be sufficient to activate emergency protocols and restore minimal life support. Jake smiled in the darkness. 12 kilowatts was actually not that much. A decent car engine produced 10 times that amount. I can build something that will make 12 kilowatts. Impossible, Hex 7 stated flatly. Biological power output is insufficient. A human cannot generate more than a few hundred watts of sustained mechanical energy. You're right, Jake agreed. One human cannot. But I do not plan to do it alone. He left them talking and made his way back to his room. Finding things in the dark was difficult, but he managed to locate his toolbox and some basic electrical supplies he had brought from Earth. More importantly, he found his exercise bike. The bike was exactly what he needed. It had a heavy flywheel that could store rotational energy, a gear system that could multiply torque, and a small generator that powered the display. With some modifications, it could produce much more electricity. Jake wheeled the bike back to the main hall, bumping into walls and door frames in the darkness. When he arrived, he could hear his classmates still debating whether his plan was possible. Here, he announced, setting the bike down with a metallic clang. This is how we make power. He spent the next few minutes explaining how the bike worked, using his flashlight to show them the pedals, gears, and generator. The alien students listened with growing interest as he described how human muscle power could be converted to rotational motion, then to electrical current. The basic generator is too small, he admitted, but I can rebuild it using parts from other equipment. Wire from the wall panels, magnets from the laboratory equipment, bearings from maintenance supplies. Even if such a device could be constructed, Zia, our 9947 said, human physiology cannot sustain the necessary power output for extended periods. Jake grinned. That is why I said I was not planning to do it alone. Look around this room. We have got students from 4 different species, each with different physical capabilities. We can work in shifts. For the first time since the blackout began, there was genuine excitement in some of the voices around him. The idea of actually doing something, rather than just waiting to die, seemed to energize his classmates. The Vorthak have strong manipulator appendages, Hex 7 said thoughtfully. We could operate hand-cranked mechanisms. Shrill possess 4 functional limbs, added Zara 9947. superior coordination for complex mechanical tasks. Etherians can create controlled pressure differentials, Dr. Vell contributed. We could operate pneumatic systems. Jake felt hope building in his chest. They were finally thinking like engineers instead of like victims. Then let us get to work. We have got a generator to build. The next hour was organized chaos. Using flashlights and emergency chemical lights they found in supply closets, the group began dismantling non-essential equipment. Jake directed the salvage operation, identifying which components they needed and how they could be repurposed. Wire came from wall panels and computer cables. Magnets were harvested from speakers and hard drives. Ball bearings were taken from sliding doors and rotating equipment. Metal frames came from broken furniture and damaged fixtures. As they worked, Jake explained the principles behind electrical generation. He showed them how moving a conductor through a magnetic field created current, how changing the speed of rotation affected voltage, how multiple coils could be wired together to increase power output. The alien students were quick learners. Their different species brought different advantages to the construction process. The Vorthic students were excellent at precise assembly work. The Jril could manipulate multiple components simultaneously. Even the Etherians found ways to help, using their gas pressure to test seals and connections. By dawn, they had built something that looked like a cross between a bicycle and an industrial machine. Multiple power sources fed into a central generator assembly that Jake had constructed from salvaged parts. It was crude, inefficient, and probably unsafe by galactic standards, but when Jake climbed onto the modified exercise bike and began pedaling, lights flickered on around the room. His alien classmates cheered in their various languages, as the first electrical power they had seen in hours brought their emergency systems back to life. The lights stayed on for exactly 3 minutes before Jake's legs gave out. He had been pedaling as hard as he could, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold air. When he finally stopped, gasping for breath, everything went dark again, but those 3 minutes had been enough. The emergency systems had recognized the power input and started their restart sequence. Several wall panels now glowed with a dim blue light, and the air circulation system had begun working again, though at minimum capacity. It functions, Hex 7 said, their voice filled with amazement. Primitive mechanical energy conversion actually functions. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and tried to catch his breath. It works, but I cannot keep this up for long. We need to set up a rotation system so different people can take turns. People? Zara9947 clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. You mean different species. Our physiologies are not compatible with your human exercise device. Jake had been thinking about this problem while he pedaled. The bike was designed for human legs and human proportions. The alien students would need their own versions of the generator that worked with their unique body types. We can modify the system, he said. The basic principle is the same for everyone. We just need different ways to create rotational motion. Over the next 2 hours, they worked together to build multiple power generation stations. Jake showed them how to construct a hand crank version for the Vorthic students. Their crystalline appendages were much stronger than human arms and could operate a manual generator with steady, powerful motions. For the Jril students, they built a more complex system that used all 4 of their arms. It looked like a strange exercise machine with multiple handles and pedals. ZR9947 tested it first, her 4 limbs moving in coordinated patterns that Jake found fascinating to watch. The Etherian students presented a bigger challenge. They had no solid limbs to operate mechanical devices. But Dr. Vell had an idea. They could use their gas pressure to operate a bellows system, pushing air through tubes that would turn a turbine connected to a generator. This is remarkable cooperation, Professor Kelvin observed. Without their light-based communication, the Vorthic instructor had to speak in their native chiming language, which Jake could not understand. But Hex 7 translated. The professor says this type of collaborative engineering is unprecedented. Our species normally work separately, each using our own methods. Jake nodded as he adjusted the tension on the drill exercise machine. Sometimes, the best solutions come from combining different approaches. Everyone has something useful to contribute. They set up a schedule. Each species would operate their generator for 30-minute shifts, keeping the power flowing continuously. The system was not efficient, but it was reliable. As long as someone was willing to work, the lights would stay on. The first full cycle went smoothly. Jake took the opening shift on his bike, pedaling steadily while monitoring the electrical output on a salvage meter. When his 30 minutes were up, Hex 7 took over on the hand crank system. The Vorthak students' crystalline arms moved in smooth, powerful strokes that maintained steady power better than Jake's human legs. Next came Zaranine 947. On the four-arm machine, the drill student's coordination was impressive. Her limbs moved in complex patterns that seemed almost like a dance, generating power while making the work look effortless. Dr. Vell's bellows system was the most unusual. The Etherian instructor swirled inside their containment suit, creating pressure changes that pushed air through the turbine system. It was the quietest of all the generators, making only a soft whooshing sound as it worked. As the hours passed, something unexpected began to happen. The alien students started asking questions about how the generators worked. They wanted to understand the mechanical principles behind electrical generation. On our homeworld, Hex 7 said during a rest period, energy production is completely automated. We have never considered the underlying physical processes. Jake found himself becoming a teacher. He explained how magnetism and motion created electricity, how gear ratios could multiply force, how efficiency could be improved through better design. The concepts were simple, but they were completely new to his alien classmates. Your species learned these principles through experimentation? Asked Zaranine 947, without computer modeling or quantum simulations. We had to, Jake replied. We figured out electricity before we had computers. We built machines before we understood quantum physics. Sometimes you learn by trying things and seeing what works. Dr. Vell found this concept fascinating. Etherian science relies heavily on theoretical modeling. We design systems in simulation. Before building physical prototypes, your approach is more direct. The alien students began sharing stories about their own civilizations. The Vorthak had developed technology by growing it like crystals, each generation building on the structure of the previous one. The Zrill had advanced through collective intelligence, with entire hive minds working together to solve complex problems. The Etherians had mastered energy by learning to control their own gaseous forms, but none of them had ever been forced to build something with their own hands, using salvaged parts and basic principles. None of them had ever been in a situation where complex technology was unavailable and simple solutions were the only option. This experience is educational in unexpected ways, Professor Kelvon observed through Hex 7's translation. We are learning about resilience and adaptability. Jake was learning too. He had always thought of his human engineering knowledge as primitive compared to alien technology. But now he realized that his people's approach had advantages. When advanced systems failed, humans knew how to fall back on simpler methods. The work was exhausting, but it brought the group together in a way that classroom discussions never had. They were no longer separate species studying together. They were a team working toward a common goal, each contributing their unique abilities. To keep everyone alive. By the end of the first day, they had established a smooth rhythm. The generators ran continuously, providing enough power for basic life support and emergency lighting. The temperature had stabilized, and the air quality remained good. But Jake knew this was only a temporary solution. They could not pedal and crank and blow air forever. Eventually, exhaustion would set in, and their makeshift power systems would fail. They needed to find a way to restore the base's main systems or signal for rescue. During his evening shift on the exercise bike, Jake thought about their options. The reactor was still running, still producing enormous amounts of energy. If they could find a way to safely tap into that power, they could restore full functionality to the base. The problem was that controlling a fusion reactor required split-second timing and precise regulation. One mistake could cause a catastrophic explosion that would destroy the entire facility. It was the kind of job that normally required quantum computers and automated safety systems, but maybe, Jake thought as he pedaled through the darkness, there was a simpler way to approach the problem. Maybe the key was not to control the reactor, but to let it control itself while they just borrowed a tiny fraction of its output. As his shift ended, and Hex 7 took over the hand-crank generator, Jake began planning their next move. They had proven that simple technology could work when advanced systems failed. Now they needed to prove that simple solutions could be just as safe and effective as complex ones. The real test was still ahead of them. On the second day, Jake woke up to the sound of efficient mechanical rhythms echoing through the base. The alien students had taken over the night shifts while he slept, and they had improved the generator systems on their own. When he arrived, in the main hall, he found Zara 9947 operating her four-armed machine with smooth, practiced motions. "Good morning, Jake," she said without breaking her rhythm. "We have maintained power output at 98% efficiency throughout the night cycle." Jake was impressed. The drill student had figured out how to optimize her movements to generate maximum electricity with minimum effort. "How did you learn to do that?" "Observation and adjustment," Zara 9947 replied. "We monitored the power output and modified our techniques to improve performance. It is the same method we use for hive mind optimization, but applied to mechanical systems." Hex 7 was waiting nearby for their turn on the hand-crank generator. The Vorthax student had also made improvements to their station, adding counterweights and leva arms that made the work easier and more effective. "Your human approach to engineering is spreading," Hex 7 explained. "We are learning to think about immediate, practical solutions instead of perfect theoretical designs." Dr. Vell approached from their bellows station, where they had been working the early morning shift. "Jake, we need to discuss long-term sustainability. Our current power generation is adequate for emergency systems, but we cannot maintain this pace indefinitely." Jake had been thinking about the same problem. They had been running the generators for over 30 hours, and everyone was getting tired. Even with shifts and improvements, the physical work was wearing them down. Sooner or later, someone would collapse from exhaustion, and their entire system would fail. "We need to tap into the main reactor," he said. "Not to control it, but just to redirect a small amount of its output." "That remains extremely dangerous," Professor Kelvin warned through Hex 7's translation. "Fusion reactors require precise regulation," Jake shook his head. "We are not going to regulate anything. We are just going to steal a little bit of power before it gets to the broken control systems." He led a small group back to the reactor room, carrying flashlights and basic tools. The massive fusion chamber continued to hum with energy, completely unaware that the rest of the base had lost power. Thick cables carried electricity from the reactor to the main distribution center, where computer systems normally manage the power flow. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to the heavy cables with his flashlight beam. "All that electricity is flowing to the control room, where it gets stopped by dead computers. But we can tap into the cables before they reach the computers." "Cable tapping is a standard procedure," Zara 9947 agreed. "But how do we regulate the power flow without computer control?" Jake smiled. "We do not regulate it. We just take what we need and let the rest continue to the control room. It is like taking a cup of water from a river. The river keeps flowing, but we get what we need." Using basic electrical tools, they installed a simple junction box on one of the main power cables. It was crude work by galactic standards, but it followed the same principles that Earth electricians had used for over a century. They connected their makeshift distribution system to the junction box with heavy gauge wire. The moment Jake closed the final connection, the base came back to life. Lights blazed on throughout the facility. Air circulation systems roared back to normal operation. Computer displays flickered and began showing status information. The familiar background hum of advanced technology filled the corridors once again. In the main hall, The alien students cheered as their translation devices reactivated and their advanced equipment came back online. For the first time in 2 days, they could communicate normally with each other and access their technological tools, but something had changed. Instead of immediately returning to their advanced systems, many of the students continued operating the manual generators they had built. They seemed fascinated by the direct, physical connection between their efforts and the electricity they produced. "This is educational," Hex 7 said, their light patterns now visible again as their crystal body glowed with renewed energy. "We have learned that understanding basic principles is more valuable than relying on complex systems." Professor Kelvin's translation device was working again, but the instructor chose to speak directly in English, which they had been learning from Jake. "Human engineering philosophy has practical applications we did not consider before." Over the following days, as the base returned to normal operation, the alien students continued to ask Jake about human technology and problem-solving methods. They wanted to learn about mechanical systems, simple electrical circuits, and manual construction techniques. "On our homeworld," Dr. Vell explained, "we have forgotten how to build things without computer assistance. Your species maintains knowledge of fundamental methods alongside advanced technology." Jake found himself teaching informal workshops on basic engineering. He showed the Vorthik students how to use hand tools effectively. He taught the Zhril students about mechanical advantage and gear ratios. He helped the Etherian students understand fluid dynamics and pressure systems. "Why do humans preserve these primitive methods?" ZR, a 9947, asked during one of these sessions. "Your species could focus exclusively on advanced technology development." "Because you never know when the advanced stuff will break," Jake replied. "My grandfather always said that the best backup plan is one that does not depend on anything else working." The alien students found this concept revolutionary. Their civilizations had spent centuries building more and more sophisticated systems, always assuming that their technology would continue to function perfectly. The idea of deliberately maintaining simpler alternatives seemed almost backward to them, but the Blackout had shown them the weakness in that approach. When everything failed at once, only the simplest solutions continued to work. 3 weeks later, when the rescue ships finally arrived to check on the base, they found something unexpected. The facility was running normally, but it also had a completely functional backup power system, built from salvaged parts and operated by manual labor. More surprising was the sight of alien students working alongside the human student, building mechanical devices and learning hands-on engineering techniques. The rescue crews had never seen such cooperation between species, or such interest in low-technology solutions. Captain Torres, the human rescue ship commander, was amazed when Jake showed him the generator systems they had built. "You powered an entire research base with exercise equipment?" "We powered it with teamwork," Jake corrected. "The equipment was just the tool. The real power came from everyone working together and not giving up when the fancy stuff stopped working." Professor Kelvin submitted a detailed report to the Galactic Education Initiative about the incident. The report recommended major changes to the curriculum, including mandatory courses in basic engineering principles and emergency problem-solving techniques. "Advanced technology is valuable," the report concluded, "but it should supplement fundamental knowledge, not replace it." The human student demonstrated that simple solutions can be as effective as complex ones, and often more reliable in crisis situations. When the semester ended, several alien students requested to continue their studies on Earth. They wanted to learn more about human engineering methods and the philosophy of maintaining simple alternatives alongside advanced technology. Jake's exercise bike was permanently installed in the base's museum, with a plaque that read, "Sometimes the best solution is the one that works when nothing else does." As Jake prepared to return to Earth, Zara 9947 approached him with a final question. "What is the most important lesson you learned during the Blackout?" Jake thought for a moment. "That being smart is not about having the most advanced tools. It is about understanding how things work and being able to adapt when circumstances change." The alien student's mandibles clicked, and what Jake had learned was the shrill equivalent of a smile. We will remember that lesson, and we will teach it to others. The Galactic Education Initiative would never be the same. For the first time in its history, alien civilizations were asking to learn from human technology instead of the other way around. Sometimes the student really does become the teacher.